All right. Excited to kick this one off. So yeah, I'm Wilson, head of research at PFM, but I was also a former Messari analyst and spent a lot of time exploring the Cosmos ecosystem. So really excited to talk to this group today. Group of people that really need no introduction, but to kind of kick this off, can everyone just give quick 30-second pitch, intro, and what you're working on currently? I'll start with you, Antonio.
Hey guys, I'm Antonio, the founder and CEO of dYdX. dYdX is one of the leading decentralized exchanges, and we're focused on financial derivatives.
Hey guys, this is co-founder and CEO of Injective Labs. So we're core contributors to Injective, which is a interoperable specialized blockchain for DeFi applications and events primitives.
Hey guys, I'll try to talk over the AC. My name is Aggarwal. I'm one of the co-founders of Osmosis, and have been working in Cosmos for about, in some capacity for about 5 years.
My name is Zaki. I am the co-founder of a project called Sommelier. I've been working in the Cosmos ecosystem since 2014. I have, I was involved, I was sort of the person who helped launch the whole ecosystem and launch IBC, and here we all are.
Perfect. Quick and easy. I love it, so we can jump right in. I think the theme of this, the panel is really going to focus on the Cosmos thesis and looking at the potential advantages that it provides, but also kind of talking about the trade-offs as well. So kind of kick it off, it's been described, the Cosmos thesis, as a rejection of the FAT protocol thesis. So Sun, I'm kick it off with you because I don't know if you're the first person to say it, but definitely prominently threw it out there. So what is the Cosmos thesis, and why is the single chain thesis, something where everything's going to be built around a single general purpose chain, wrong?
Yeah, so I think I use that phrase that it's a rejection of the FAT protocol thesis. Really, what it means is that I think value goes, at the end of the day, to the applications. If you look at the web in the 90s, if you want to bet on the web, you don't bet on CompuServe and AOL. In retrospect, you should have bet on Amazon and Google, right? Because those are the applications are the ones that actually have relationships with users and have actual stickiness to them. And applications will move to the platforms and L1s that or build their own app chains, whatever gives them the best product that they can build. But the stickiness of the applications is really where the value accrues. And Cosmos is sort of just a acceptance of that fact and letting applications sort of build their own fully vertically integrated stack that allows them a lot more customizability and control over their system, as well as more value capture because you can capture the full MEV value of your application outputs, for example.
Perfect. I'll hand it over to Zaki. Kind of the same comment. Anything to add there?
So I'll just, Sunny and I have basically believed the same thing for the last 5 years. But I'll just go a little bit deeper on sort of what it means to sort of reject the FAT protocol thesis. So one of the points is that there are these enormous network effects that we've seen to applications being on the same blockchain. We've seen that they can compose with each other, that you have wallets and block explorers that work across block applications. You have communities that sort of also interoperate. The Cosmos thesis was you could actually take all of those network effects and lift them out of being in one blockchain and have them at the multi-blockchain level. Preserve all the network effects, the ability to interoperate, the ability to compose, the ability to have common block explorers, wallets, common infrastructure. But then, as the application, you get to full stack customize your application. You get to deliver the best possible user experience. And so that rather than this sort of trade-off where it's hey, I'm going to compromise my user experience to get these network effects, Cosmos gives every application builder the best of both worlds.
Perfect. Appreciate the overview and the insight. And jumping over to Antonio and Eric, change it up a little bit. We've seen some shift going over from this building on single chains to actually building out on your own independent protocol, most prominently defined by dYdX. And so I want to kick it over to you, Antonio. So now that we're seeing this kind of trend. What kind of sparked this trend? Was it due to the inherent nature of being locked into a single protocol and just benefits that you provided from an independent protocol, or just kind of expanding on that? So Antonio, I'll start with you, then jump to Eric.
Basically what Zaki said. The reason we are moving to Cosmos at a really high level is because you get a lot of customizability for your application by building your own Cosmos chain. The main issue that we're kind of facing at dYdX, probably more than a lot of different DeFi protocols, is scalability. We run an order book-based exchange right now, and order books require at least on the order of 1,000 transactions per second or so. And not only do they require 1,000 transactions per second or so, but ideally you don't have to pay very many gas fees. Where is that all coming from? It's effectively market makers quoting, placing, and canceling orders. So right now we're building our own Cosmos chain. It's not live yet. But the general thinking that went into why we should build it is we took a look around and we were like, OK, so what blockchain can support 1,000 transactions per second with low gas fees? And we were like, none of them, Cosmos included. So why do we build on Cosmos in that case? We're effectively building an off-chain but decentralized order book into the validators themselves. And we kind of had this realization that by not requiring consensus on some parts of the application, you can get much higher scalability. So that's just, I think, a really tangible example of what Zaki was alluding to, where we really feel like this is the way we can build the best possible product. And it's by vertically owning all of the stack. The last thing I'll say is I think you see this kind of parallel the evolution of a lot of tech companies in general. Normally, when you're starting a tech startup, you maybe build one part of the stack, but then you grow, you get more people on your team, and you want to vertically own everything, every sort of like piece of the technology, and customize it for exactly your use case. And I think that's kind of the stage we've gotten to at dYdX and why we decided to make the move to Cosmos.
Perfect. Eric, why do you think we're seeing this trend, and what kind of drove you to build your own independent chain?
Yeah, I'm in quite an agreement with Antonio here. Is that so Injective have processed probably like 100 or so million for like the past 10 or 12 months. And that type of transaction load, putting on any type of L2 solution or any type of base layer generalized environment, it would be extremely cost prohibitive. And especially because most of those transactions are updating and storing orders and et cetera. So in order for Injective as a network to even be viable, you would have to really optimize, customize a lot of the base layer primitives within a blockchain itself, and only Cosmos can enable you to do that. And with basically all those configurations, it also enables developers to leverage the same common infrastructure to build things that they want and things that they were prevented from building in a traditional generalized environment like Ethereum. And I think the most exciting part here is that since the community for any type of app-specific chain is gearing towards the same direction or all aligned towards the same direction, that means that they can make protocol parameters and make educated decisions from a governance level to basically create this best possible network for a specific use case or a specific sector.
Great. Yeah. So a lot of what I'm hearing is just the expanded amount of customizability that you can add to the chain and cater to your specific needs. And I think what's interesting about the Cosmos SDK is you're able to actually experiment at the protocol level, whereas in Ethereum was pretty much at the application, and then you had to inherit a lot of the built-in properties of Ethereum or whatever other chain. Being able to launch a new chain isn't necessarily anything new. So I guess I'll kick it over to Zaki. What is it about the Cosmos SDK that you can do that's entirely different from Ethereum? Like some of the experimentation that you can do that kind of expands the utility of these blockchain systems.
Yeah, so I guess there's all kinds of different things that kind of don't have any true comparable in them. So for instance, okay, so what are the things the Cosmos SDK give you out of the box that are kind of unique and amazing? So one is it gives you this bridging protocol called IBC, or this interoperability protocol. This ability to send data packets between every IBC-compatible change, which is today mostly Tendermint and mostly Cosmos SDK, but that world is changing very quickly. Near and Polkadot are getting IBC support relatively soon. So you get this like amazing bridging capability. But then you have how proof of stake works, how fees are distributed. Basically, the entire economic toolkit of like how much a user has to pay, who pays for them, how transactions are authorized. You have this expanding universe of examples that you can draw on about how to compose things. And then, with what dYdX is doing, which is really something that has been, Sunny and I have been thinking about this design for at least 4 years that like dYdX is building. But like there was not necessarily any example of how to do it. But there were enough building blocks that you can take the entire Cosmos SDK system and build like an entire non-consensus order book system out of the tools that like are sort of built in.
Some examples of like, for us, one thing we focus a lot on is like UX stuff, and like the ability to change how fees work on your blockchain is like so important. I think it's one of the biggest like UX hurdles in every like L1 today, that you need a specific token in order to pay fees. In Osmosis, we went ahead and just, we can go customize the blockchain, and we made it so you can pay fees in any token you want. And we think that's like a huge UX win. Or another thing you have is you can change like how transactions are executed in a block. So, if your protocol has if your chain has a lending protocol on it, being able to liquidate stuff is extremely important. So you can have it so like liquidations are automatically triggered by the protocol itself. They get prioritized over every other type of transaction. You can build protocol application level semantics into the protocol itself. Another thing that's like, I think a lot of the next level of innovation that's going to happen in blockchains is really on the privacy side. And I think it's pretty telling that like almost any project that's doing like anything really meaningful with like privacy right now, like majority of them are building on Cosmos, whether it's like Anoma or Penumbra, Secret Network, NIM, even Zcash is now like moving to Cosmos as well.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that a little bit more, just to make it sound even more comprehensive. If you think about the Ethereum ecosystem, there are a lot of like middle layer tools that are kind of built to kind of optimize or service some of the shortcomings of being in a generalized EVM. But as a vertically integrated stack, or for any type of Cosmos SDK chain, kind of like what Sunny mentioned, et cetera, like you can build that into the protocol itself and really make those specific, and obviously remove the need for those middle layers, and also make it much easier and much better for the general developers or the general user, and create a much more comprehensive, better experience. Injective has executing smart contracts, et cetera, that basically allows a lot of those shortcomings of EVM to basically be removed in one kind of like simple chain upgrade.
So I think you hear all of us talk a lot about Cosmos enabling building some of the best products in DeFi, and I certainly think that's true. I think the initial reaction for a lot of people when we made public our move to Cosmos was, okay, like you're moving to this chain that has, call it, way fewer users than Ethereum or Solana or basically anything else. And one of the things that I think people have a big misconception about in crypto is that they think of different chains as a tool for distribution. Like, for example, if I'm OpenSea, now we're live on Arbitrum or Solana or whatever, and we get access to that market. I think that's a real thing right now, but I personally think that's kind of a transitory state for crypto in general. And I think very soon you won't even really be able to know what chain you're on when you're using these applications. And that's how it should be. I think Osmosis just added this in kind of a native bridging feature directly into their website. We'll have that on dYdX as well. It'll work with all the same wallets. And it'll just be a much more seamless user experience. I think kind of the scary bridging world is going to improve, and especially a lot from the UX perspective. And then once you don't have to get shipped off to some third-party site to do the bridging, and it's just like, okay, let's deposit into Osmosis or deposit into dYdX, you won't really even know what chain you're on. And with the interoperability, I think it makes for a much better product experience overall.
Perfect. So going to flip the script a little bit and kind of talk about the other side. I think one of the benefits of that single chain thesis is you're supplying security from one single network, and that gets distributed to all the applications up the top. And so it's an easier standpoint in the sense that they can focus on building the application instead of worrying about the security. And from a user standpoint, you don't need to evaluate every single individual project. You can just kind of trust the system as a whole is working as is. So I'll start up with Sunny. Is what is like it also, yeah, one other aspect is that these security layers, it's kind of this belief that the base asset should have some sort of monetary premium, and that's what kind of gives it this level of security that can be branched out elsewhere. So one, does the base layer asset to secure the chain need to have a monetary premium? And then two, how can users evaluate the different security levels of when you're working on different chains?
Yeah. So, I don't think most base assets will have monetary premium. I don't really think most crypto assets, maybe other than Bitcoin and Ethereum, have much monetary premium. Really, the value of the base tokens is what the value of the protocol is, whether it's getting it through MEV capture or protocol transaction fees or other types of fees. But how does the security work? I'm giving a talk on this at Cosmoverse next week. But how I see this happening is building something called mesh security, where you have all these app chains. They all have their own tokens, and that are securing their own chains. But really, you look at something like NATO, right? NATO is the greatest security alliance in the world. It's a network of sovereign countries that have mutual defense pacts where they come to each other's defense if any of them is attacked, right? I think the same thing will happen between app chains. If validators do something malicious on Osmosis, they'll get slashed on Injective and dYdX as well, right? And basically, by building this entire mesh security system, any one app chain is going to get the security of all the app chains that are doing this shared security mesh with each other. And I think the value of all the app chains summed together is going to be higher than any L1.
Yeah. So just to expand on a couple more concrete examples of this. So what IBC, so most people think of interop and they think bridging, right? It's I'm going to bridge my tokens. The real composability of IBC comes when we compose chains themselves. So what Sunny is describing is one mechanism of sort of crypto economic composability between multiple blockchains, because things like staking and slashing information can actually be transmitted over IBC. We can use this, for instance, to launch chains that are in a kind of what we call interchain security model, where the chain doesn't need to have its own native base token, doesn't need its own security model. It can sort of be launched by the security of another chain. High-value public goods may be a good reason why Atoms, and you'll hear more about this in Cosmoverse. Another really cool project is called Babylon Chain. Babylon Chain is the idea of actually using checkpointing into Bitcoin to secure the entire IBC network, to extend the security of Bitcoin to the entire IBC network. And it'll give you, one of the things it'll let you do is it'll prevent certain economic attacks against IBC. It'll also create a world in which potentially we can have much shorter unbonding periods for staked assets.
And Antonio, kind of specifically looking at how do you kind of look at it from a security standpoint, especially coming from something that was being built on Starkware, ultimately secured by Ethereum, and launching an independent chain? How do you look at it from that standpoint when you hear that security question?
Yeah, absolutely. So like these guys said, I think there's a lot of exciting improvements coming down the pipe very soon. But even now, I kind of think of the security of, let's just take dYdX on Starknet versus dYdX on its own Cosmos chain. I think neither one is kind of objectively better than the other one. So of course, we're not going to get to a point on the dYdX chain where there is even close to as many validators as there are on Ethereum now. But at the same time, you also get sovereignty over your own chain, and that lets you deal with issues, things like hacks, things like bugs, or upgrades much more seamlessly. And I think you kind of saw this play out with Terra. Obviously, that didn't work from a financial perspective, but they were able to at least salvage something from the wreckage because they had sovereignty over their own chain. And if that had been a smart contract on Ethereum, it probably just would have been done forever. So I think it's overall a trade-off and one that we feel good about. But I think it's not quite as black and white as a lot of people make it seem. It's not quite just like only the number of validators that matter. There's a lot of other aspects that play into it as well.
Great. So I think, yeah, we talked about how there are upgrades coming down the line, the most prominent being interchain security that will introduce these mesh networks, or these mesh security networks, to extend that security from one chain, maybe a more valuable one, over to other ones. So in a sense, you're looking at what could be many different hubs out there securing some of these other chains. So I want to pose a question. I'll start with Eric. How many chains do you expect to turn into hubs? And how many viable hubs do you think we'll see out there? Will it be only a few that kind of connect directly with each other? And we'll see some concentration at some point? Or will there be a long tail of hubs going out there, going after different use cases?
Yeah, we can actually think about it in terms of what the multi-chain landscape looks like right now. But obviously, within a Cosmos context, it has certainly been going to be a much better experience. It's going to have a much better composability, et cetera. Because in the multi-chain world right now, like what you're seeing is that there's Ethereum has their own L2 solution. There are different types of kind of this shared security / checkpointing system in like an abstract way. And then obviously for Ava, et cetera, they also have the concept of subnets, where there's also essentially a subchain that shares the security with Ava. And I think what's really exciting about Cosmos is that it's going to be able to achieve scaling and creating these interchain security hubs and enabling a lot of different apps that are tied with these type of ICS hubs in a much more seamless way, bootstrap a lot of the elements that might come with the pain of kind of communicating between all these subchains or child chains. And so I would say that certainly there's going to be a concentration of a few of these interchain security hubs. And over time, obviously, there's going to be more exploration, especially with the advent of Mesh Network, which would be the third iteration of it, where it might not have a clear concept of essentially like an interchain security hub, but rather kind of like a hub of validator that tries to validate as many chains as possible.
That's great. Zaki, I want to kick it over to you, kind of curious on that end as well.
So I think one of the things that, I would say that when we wrote the original Cosmos white paper, the notion of the hub and spoke system was probably not, it was like a loose opinion, right? It was just not a strongly held belief among anyone involved, whether or not this would, it has to be this way. It's look, the market will figure out what it needs to be. I think one of the things, though, you are going to start seeing is more like this interchain ecosystem where you have different economic zones. So there will be an economic zone that clusters around Atom. There will be an economic zone that's not too far separated from it that clusters around Osmo. But as Polkadot gets IBC, there will be an economic zone that clusters around DOT, and there will be sort of a trade route between them. And so as we sort of imagine that all blockchains can eventually get as good a bridging protocol as IBC is through just the expansion of IBC to multiple chains, one would expect that there will be these economic zones that cluster around large economic entities, and we just think of Ethereum and BNB and Polygon and Matic as is becoming part of that ecosystem.
Yeah, so Sunny, this idea of all these different hubs out there, do you see them specializing in a certain sector, a specific use case? And so you have all these different, and having to hyper-specialize to differentiate themselves long term?
Yeah, so I mean, like Zaki said, I think that a hub isn't really a technical term. It's really just more of an emergent property when you look at the economic graph of networks. But when it comes to security, I think every chain is going to be an interchain security provider. There's no such thing as a single interchain security provider. They're all going to be connected via this mesh network. But what's going to happen is things want to share security with the chains that they have. Only 4 EU countries are not part of NATO. Countries that have high levels of economic interdependency will want to have high levels of security relationships. Something like Osmosis and Axler. 70% of Axelar TVL is currently on Osmosis. 4 out of the top 10 assets on Osmosis come from Axelar. Of course, there's going to be a high level of security relationship that we want to have with each other so we can secure each other. So, which chains, which counterparty chains choose to do interchain security, bilateral security relationships with, will be heavily determined by who they have high levels of economic relationships with.
So that's great. So we've covered Cosmos SDK, what's different about it. Covered how these different upgrades on the line could, how this mesh network of different ecosystems can evolve. So I guess one of my final questions is, what are the future of these different apps look like, or different applications look like? So is it more going to be vertically integrated, looking at a specific use case? So for dYdX, looking at derivatives, Osmosis, really kind of replicating a centralized exchange, but with a decentralized framework. Or are we going to start to see more end of app chains, so almost looking like a generalized platform, but there might be a constant theme? And I think the last one really kind of introduces this idea of super apps. So having a core chain and launching child contracts on other chains to plug into. So kind of curious, do you see one kind of evolving as the more prominent one, or is it really kind of use case dependent? I'll start with you, Antonio.
Yeah, I think it's more use case dependent. I like to think we're sort of blazing a little trail at dYdX in terms of being on the forefront of what some protocols will do. For us, we make the explicit trade-off that we care a little bit less about composability than a lot of other platforms. So for that reason, it was easier for us to go off and move to our own Cosmos chain. And then, like these guys said, there's not zero composability on Cosmos, but it certainly is easier if you're all on the same platform to be able to make margin trading by taking out a compound loan combined with a Uniswap trade. Like, that can be powerful, but that's explicitly something we're not trying as much to do. I think right now we are trying to build a product that at a very high level is like decentralized FTX or decentralized Binance. And in that kind of world where we have a lot of the products already built just on the dYdX chain, there's less of a need for composability. And different products have different trade-offs that they care about. I talked about our really high requirements for scalability. But if you're like a Uniswap or something, yeah, you probably don't need to be worrying about 1,000 trades per second on Uniswap anytime soon, and that will cause you to make different trade-offs. So I think we'll see both. I think that we will see a lot of applications kind of move to rollups, and then after they try out the rollups, they will want, a lot of them at least, to have more of this customizability that we've been talking about. And then I think we'll see more people take the road that dYdX took and kind of eventually build their own chain as kind of the end state solution.
I want to kick the same question over to Eric, because building a DeFi theme chain, do you kind of see it in a very similar way where it's use case dependent, or how do you see your chain evolving?
Yeah, I would say the overall structure of the Cosmos ecosystem, it's going to be really up to what the specific application or developer or project you're looking at. Some project might find it easier, and obviously it saves a lot of costs and overhead and initial barrier to have an app on like a generalized environment or a specialized environment, satisfy what they need. And some apps have amassed such a great user base, or willing to put up the upfront costs and build their specialized layer to improve the user experience, to improve the overall offering. And I think that's the beauty of Cosmos, is that number one is that projects get to make that choice. They don't have to begrudgingly accept any type of trade-offs or limitations of a generalized environment. Now they have the optionality to do so. And then number two is that basically, as an ecosystem, or as kind of like a community, or as a protocol, over time, Cosmos will expand more and more on the composability front to abstract away and really blur the line between building a chain versus building an app or building a protocol. And I think the last part would be, Cosmos as an ecosystem with IBC as such a powerful primitive basically enables kind of this shared functionality across everyone who joins this ecosystem. Like for example, I think Wormhole is deploying Cosmos Awesome contract on top of Injective, and those Solana assets will not only be shared by Injective ecosystem, but also for the entirety of the Cosmos ecosystem via IBC. And that's absolutely a very, very powerful thing, because any benefit or any new functionality or any new feature coming into the Cosmos ecosystem, all the projects or all the blockchains or all the products building on top of each sovereign blockchains get to enjoy it.
So running out of time, but kind of to sum it up, I think one of the key themes throughout is it's very product oriented, and the fact that you can customize the entire chain to fit your specific needs, whereas there was on the other side with Ethereum is it very much trying to expand the potential of composability throughout all these different networks and expanding upon the core principles of that network, whereas this one you can pretty much build it and have a very end user focus.
I would say that we're still very composability focused. The goal of what we're doing is to make cross-chain composability as good as single-chain composability. All of the web is built off of asynchronous programming, right? And it's inevitable that blockchains will have to do the same.
Agree. Yeah. Thanks for adding that in, and with the introduction of interchain accounts and adoption of it, hopefully soon. So fingers crossed there. Anyway, we're out of time. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you guys later.